Peace. What's good? What's good? Uncle my aunt, Black Power, Free the Land, Resurrection, Hotep, Osama. I messed that one up, so we're gonna leave that one there. Yo, peace, calling in from Mississippi. Thanks everybody for joining us again. Shout out to our brother Isaac in the background, always holding us down. We got another banger today. This is our Facebook Live series focused on healing historical trauma with a focus on Black liberation. We got another dope leader. Our peoples, our sister, our elder, our mother from the West, part of this country. Shout out to Cali, shout out to Oakland. And we're gonna get this started with a libation to bring in our ancestors, so that this sacred conversation about healing historical trauma that's gonna get into the details of our pain, of our families, of our analysis, with a focus on liberation. And we call it in from Mississippi. Shout out to Mississippi, and shout out to the South. With no further ado, let's get into this libation. Ashe?
Ashe.
Ashe, yo. This is for our ancestors. I said, this is for our ancestors. I said, this is for our ancestors, particularly the ones that stand with us and plan with us. We talking about a pedagogy of patience. They still waiting for your transformation and for you to heal from all the steel blazing and generation after generation of living out the plantation. This is for our ancestors. For those who get killed for us, sacrifice and build for us. We talking about indigeneity without no regulation. Culture is our education. Emotional communication. Vulnerability is what we embracing. This is for our ancestors. Particularly the ones that love you when they don't got to, but love you because they got you. This is for our ancestors. Particularly the ones that stand with us and plan with us. We talking about a pedagogy of patience. They still waiting for our transformation and for us to heal from all the steel blazing and generation after generation of living out your own plantation. That was for our ancestors. Snap it up for the ancestors, all the good spirits, known and unknown, that come in a good way is welcome. We stand on their shoulders. We build on their incomplete works. We say their names so that they can live on, and we honor the works that they completed. So once again, we got another one. We got our sister AYOOLA in the building. Let's just get into this overview. After this overview, we're going to get into a light introduction, and we're going to let AYOOLA introduce themselves. So H.O.L.L.A has been organizing to further develop a praxis of Black liberation. And we've been doing this to build our capacity and our consciousness to fight the war. And us at H.O.L.L.A standing on the Black Liberation Army, standing on the Black Panthers, standing on Mother Queen Dr. Frances Cress Westland, standing on Fannie Lou Hamer, Martin Luther King, and many of our grandmothers from Mississippi, Puerto Rico, DR, Louisiana, Honduras. We conceptualize the war as the African Mayafra. And this describes the destruction of our African cosmological story, particularly by Indo-Europeans and Europeans, in the form of African colonization, African enslavement, and the killing of our African ancestors, culture, and taking of our land. Further, the war represents a continued cultivation of white supremacy violence onto Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth and communities through the development and maintaining of federal, state, and city and societal institutions that do not serve but rather attack African people and prevent our healing and human development. Further, the Mayafa is sustained at multiple levels and intersections of violence, right? So we talking about historical violence. Too loud? Oh, it's in the kitchen. Yeah, in the white bag. Okay. All right. That's Auntie Love. Shout out to Auntie Bird, the matriarchy of the family, man, holding it down. So violence is multiple and it's intersectional and it's at multiple levels. So we talking about historical and spiritual violence. And then that adds to structural violence. And then spiritual and historical violence that adds into structural violence goes into our interpersonal relationships, so interpersonal violence. And then we talking about internalized violence. We internalize all of that violence in our own selves and our own ideas. So we saying that the war is sustained through those levels of violence and intersections. And this is even more particular for what our big brother Eddie Ellis, our big sister Kathy Boudin, and many more of our community leaders have told us about the 7 neighborhood phenomena. And the 7 neighborhood phenomena is an analysis that was developed in prison in the late 60s, early 70s that really map out that 7 neighborhoods feed up to 75% of New York State prison system. And those 7 neighborhoods come from our communities in New York City: Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, East New York, Crown Heights, Southside Jamaica, Queens, South Bronx, Lower East Side, just to name a few. And there's a couple of peripheral neighborhoods that any given year they could be substituted into that equation. So this project here, particularly, is focused on the historical violence of the war and how that prohibits our youth and community from accessing healing powers of spiritual renewal that is needed for Black liberation and to get back into a praxis of Black liberation. And we stand on Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart and Dr. Joy DeGeary when we talk about historical or generational trauma. And these elders tell us that this phenomenon of violence is the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding, right, across generations, plus one's own lifespans. Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart says that historical trauma is the result of centuries of colonizations and abuse, and it highlights the effects of separations of family, forced assimilation of boarding schools, particularly thinking about the Lakota tribe here in North America. Dr. Joy DeGeary, talking about North America as well, says that African enslavement was some of the worst. Let me say that again. African enslavement was some of the worst physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual violence in human history. So both of these sisters, these elders, describe historical trauma or generational trauma as a historical force, as a state apparatus that is generationally passed on and that is spread across generations, geography, relationships, and our psycho-spiritual embodiments. They're saying that the violence is not only in Mississippi and Haiti, right, but it's in our relationships. And then it said it's in our embodiments. Like when we see cops in the street, how do you feel in your body? When you, for women who've seen people who've been sexually assaulted, what do you see in your body when you see the person who's sexually assaulted? What does it feel like for Black people who've been sexually assaulted by America, sexually assaulted by white supremacy, generation after generation, that when we go into these jobs institutions that are developed by white institutions in the war, when we go into these educational institutions that are developed by white supremacy in the war, when we are harassed by the criminal punishment system that continues to lock us up, how does it make us feel in our bodies, right? The psycho-spiritual embodiments. So, you know, we doing a lot of work. This work particularly is focused on our legacy project. And we've been traveling to memorial sites. Matter of fact, today, we even went to the Black Native American mounds in Mississippi, in Pocahontas, Mississippi. We've been going to historical sites, having political education sessions before those sites, traveling through planes, cars, buses to the sites, then having healing circles after experiencing those sites. So we done went to Kemet, South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, Tennessee, Oakland, and we hopefully going back to Oakland at the end of this year. We done went to Puerto Rico. We done went to Atlanta. We done went to DC. We done did numerous trips in New York. And all of these, I'm giving you states, but all these locations, we're going to see DeMarcus Vesey. We're going to see the Nat Turner. We went to Southampton, Virginia. We went to go see the Nat Turner War Trail. We went to Puerto Rico to see the Afro-Puerto Ricans in Louisa and study the Puerto Rican independence movement. And this is about remembering. Not only remembering the places where we won, but also remembering the hard lessons from the pain. So we went to Washington, D.C. and studied the development of Washington, D.C., studied the development of laws and policies, to see how not only did we give great civilization to the world, not only did we fight back against the war, but also how was white supremacy developed and how has it been maintained, right? So today's conversation is a continuation. It's a continuation of this legacy project of bringing in our community, bringing in our family, bringing in people that we know got experiences that translate to wisdom, that come from the shits, that come from the life, that come from saying, I want to breathe, that comes from saying, I still got more love to go. You heard what Rocky said in Rocky 4, I think, I ain't heard no bell yet, I still got one more round. I feel like Black people have been saying that for a long time. I still got one more round. I still got spirit to love. They done tried to kill us. We still able to love. We still able to go into the pain. And I was listening to our last Facebook live series with our dope community person, Dr. Zulika Henderson, and they was talking about in the historical trauma model when them and their colleagues revised the historical trauma model, when they was thinking about African people, before you get to the colonization and the enslavement and the Mayafa, they put our cultural well-being first. So what that means, and what Dr. Zuleka was saying, no matter what we're going through or what we ever built, before we even built anything, as Black people, as African people, you can always go into yourself. You can always go into your culture for wellness. You can always go into your Blackness for wellness, because your culture and your cultural traditions of being is a being of wellness, is a being of civilization. With that saying, this project is asking the epistemological question. And epistemological, for our family out there, is saying, how do we get knowledge? How do we make knowledge? What knowledge do we center? What knowledge is most important? Who are we going to collect knowledge from? What voices and what experiences and what histories of knowledge do we put in our cultural traditions of well-being? And this epistemological question that we lean in on is, what knowledge can we gain when Black youth and community that is most impacted by the war lean into our historical wounds for medicine? So once again, what is the knowledge, right? What is the practices? What is the strategies? What is the remembrance that we can gain, that we can recollect, that we can like add back up from all of the years of relocation and false textbooks, that we can regain, that we can gain? And I'm talking about Black people. indigenous people, young people, grandmoms, people in prison, people on the block doing what they call black on black crime, right? People in churches. Like, what can we gain when we don't avoid it? When we don't say, nah, we're not going to not talk about it. Let's just migrate up south. Let's just migrate from the south. Let's just run from it. Let's just move up north. No, I'm saying when we lean into the historical pain, what wisdom is there from medicine? So with that being said, I think the stage is set. We have a sister that we've been journeyed with. We were just on the phone last night talking, and a couple of nights before that. And I know you wrote a piece about the war, and we've been sharing space together. We've been traveling. I'm about to see you in New Orleans in a couple of days. So we family in many ways, family in many ways. And that's part of the work that we're doing when we talk about journey, and it's talking about knowing yourself in many ways. Because the way that white supremacy has developed us, we don't even like being black. We don't even think that we could do math. We don't even think that our mothers who was impacted by crack is beautiful. We don't even think that our uncles who was drinking a little bit or drinking a little bit too much are still dope. We don't think our young people who sometimes are out there killing each other, that's our future. That's our babies, right? That's us. So that's about knowing yourself in multiple ways, right? And with AYOOLA, not just me personally, but with H.O.L.L.A, we know each other through conferences, through late night calls, through events like this, through strategy sessions like, yo, I'm thinking about this. And it's probably, and there is a lot more ways that we could get to know each other. But I say that we teach each other. We teach and learn with each other. We cook with each other. We stew with each other. And actually we use these spaces like this to stew out loud, to cook out loud. And you always, I don't know what you're going to get into today, but I'm always humbled by how you, at least I know you come into the work, at least through one vein, through your children and through the struggles that you experience from your own children's struggles and our Block struggles. And then also your own vulnerability and spirit and praxis with those struggles as a mother who lost their child to gun violence. I'm always still amazed because in our space of healing justice, and what I mean by healing justice, people who are doing deep journeying work, collective and individual wellness. Because there's a lot of mothers that's out here doing work who lost children, but you don't necessarily hear them in the deep nexus of healing justice because they're dealing with a lot of pain from losing a loved one. So I'm always admired about how you kick it with and people who shoot people. And a lot of times in the 360, I be understanding like, damn, some of that might be feeling like, that energy is part of the reason why my son is not here, part of the reason why my family's not here. So I just always, sometimes I don't say that, but that's a loud, silent honor that I appreciate you for. And I think, that's why one of the reasons why you're so important to the work that we do. And your story and just your work is also important. So with that being said, add into this context about the war. If you want to add anything more about the war, please further add into this context about historical trauma, and it's focused on Black liberation as an opening, and then let the people know who you are too. So whatever order feels good for you.
Okay. First and foremost, shout out to my brother, Corey, who his spirit is so courageous and contagious. I can remember the first time I saw Corey, it was 2015, and he was sitting on top of somebody's desk or something like that. And there was young people standing around him, and I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could feel his energy. And then the next day, at the conference at Beyond the Bars, I heard him spit what he always does. You know, we came to heal what you came to do. And that resonated with me. And I have incorporated that into my healing circles. I have introduced it to my people that are out here in these streets doing this work. So I want to just shout out Corey. I also want to shout out Teresa and Corey Jr., Mother Green. Sometimes people don't understand the sacrifice our families make for us to be in these spaces, for us to give of ourselves to other families and our communities. It doesn't go without a cost, you know. And so I just want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge my children and the sacrifices that they make, you know, and just our families for sharing us with the community and, you know, the world, so to speak. So shout out to that.
Shout out to the family.
You have said so many things that resonate with me. I'm listening, I'm taking notes. I'm trying to remember my facial expressions because I get real serious and intense because there's so much to talk about. There's so much healing to do. There's so much work to do. Who am I? I mean, you pretty much touched on it. I'm really just a Black girl from a neighborhood in San Francisco. Shout out San Francisco. Corey be wanting me to be from Oakland. He always talking about AYOOLA from Oakland. Nah, I'm from San Francisco, the city. Oakland is the town, but I'm from the Bay. It's all Bay love.
Shout out to San Francisco. No shots. I love San Francisco.
Yeah. And, you know, I've been thinking we were building last night. Let me tell you about Corey. You have an opportunity to be in his presence, to be in circle with him, to be in conversation with him, or you might just hop on a phone call thinking you just check it in and you get a whole ass history lesson. So shout out to you for last night, you and A-Rocks. We got on and we were building about New Orleans, and he was just educating us on some things that Corey is a master of details. And so he was sharing with us about, you know, New Orleans and journeying and the mounds. The mounds, is that right?
Yeah, the ancient American mounds all across the Mississippi River from the Gulf all the way up to the Great Lakes in Canada.
Okay, yeah, the Mississippi River. Plessy versus Ferguson. I'm very familiar with Plessy versus Ferguson, but I didn't know Plessy was from Louisiana. So again, you know, you spend some time with Corey, you're going to come away with some knowledge. So I want to thank you for that. I've been really journeying the last 6 months in a way that I have not journeyed previously. I've been doing a lot of journeying with myself, with my children. I am blessed and fortunate to be living in San Francisco in a house that my grandparents purchased back in 1956. I'm in my bedroom, that was their bedroom, that there's just so much richness and so many memories and so much history in this house. And so I just want to start today talking about the legacy of my grandfather, Ernest Escort. He was about 15 or 16 years old, a teenager, definitely not 18, when he had to leave Morgan City, Louisiana, because he got into an argument with a white man. And this was 1928, and we all know what the consequences were for that. And so when I think about journeying and I think about what was it like for my grandfather at 16 years old to have to leave everything he knew and everything he was familiar with because his life depended on him leaving. And this wasn't like it was a planned trip. Oh, this summer you going to stay with cousin so-and-so. This was an argument happened, and within a couple of days, my grandfather left Morgan City, Louisiana. He went to Texas, where he subsequently met and married my grandmother. And then, like so many Black people in the South in the 1930s, you know, it was the Depression and so forth and so on, he migrated to California. And I'm not sure what exact year he migrated here, but he came here, and as so many families did, he worked where he could, he saved money, and he sent for my grandmother and my mom and her 3 siblings. They lived in the projects here in San Francisco. My grandfather, I always remember him working 2 jobs. Again, like so many Black people, he worked for Southern Pacific, the railroads, 5 days a week and 2 nights a week. He had a part-time job at a bakery. He worked and he was a provider. And my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home grandmother. I spent a lot of time with her, learned so much from both of them. My grandfather passed away in 2014 at the age of 102. He has just given me so much knowledge and wisdom and information. And I've spent a lot of time just thinking about his journey, just thinking about the fact that he was 58 years old when the Voting Rights Act of 1964 passed. He was 58 years old before he could vote for the first time. You know, we can say what we want. We all have, you know, thoughts, feelings, and opinions about voting. But when you just think about 58 years old before he was able to vote for the first time, and when Obama was elected president, it definitely had a whole different meaning for him than it had for me and other people. And one of my, I wrote a piece recently of my relationship with voting, and I talked about being a little girl and remembering my grandparents getting dressed up in what, you know, Black folks call your Sunday best, and being the first ones at the poll. And I remember that because I used to go with them. And it was a big deal because, again, they waited so many years to do that. So many things that I learned from them, family and work ethic, but also the journeying part. What I also want to say is, yesterday I needed a plumber. So I called the plumber. The plumber comes to the house. I'm standing at the top of the stairs, and he says, as he's walking up the stairs, he says, "Oh, this is Mr. Escort's house." And I just smiled and I said, "Yeah, that's my grandfather." And he just went on and began to tell me stories about how he knew my grandfather and the cars that my grandfather drove, and how my grandfather was a sharp dresser and everybody knew him. And that's legacy. That is legacy where, you know, 7 years later, this man who I had never seen before came to the house and started talking about my grandfather. And it's not uncommon for me to be in front of the house, getting stuff out the car, and people will literally stop in the middle of the street. "Are you Mr. Escort's granddaughter?" "Yeah, I know your grandfather." And so when we talk about legacy takes on many different forms. And I'm just honored to be able to continue in the legacy that he started, and journeying, you know. So I'm just doing healing work. I've spent many, probably too many years working in jails and prisons, doing a lot of different work within the punishment system. And the thing that has been consistent and constant is the presence of Black and brown bodies behind those walls, and the oppression, mentally, emotionally, physically, that I've seen firsthand by spending so much time in jails and prisons doing work with those who are incarcerated. And I'm finally taking a breath from that. I'm currently on leave from work, for what I'm calling trauma exhaustion. I started working in the punishment system in 1981. I went to San Quentin for the first time in 1984, taking a group of young people there. And so that's how long I've been on this particular journey. And it takes its toll on you. As you said a few minutes ago, Corey, I work with a lot of young people. That's our future. Those are our babies. And when you work in custody settings, when you are about the people, when you are about community, it takes a toll on you day after day after day when you're seeing babies locked up and you're seeing men who have been locked up for 30, 40 years. This country is whack. And, it's whack. And we at war. And we're going to get into it. And one of the things that saddens me is so many of our people don't even know that we're at war. So many of our people think that they've gotten some level of success because they have the letters behind their names and the cars and the homes and the positions and all this stuff, and not even realizing that at any given time your life can be flipped upside down because this country hates Black people. So that's where I am. That's what I'm doing. Shout out to my grown adult children. They're dope in their own right. I tell people all the time, my biggest flex is that my children all live their lives in service to others, in service to family and community. 3 of my 5 children are educators, and they're, and we're talking about starting school because we realize that the current school systems is not for us. It's not for us, and it's not for our children. And so we are, as a family, planning and plotting and cooking because our desire is to open up a school, Kings and Queens Academy, because nobody is going to do us better and do more for us than us.
Wait a minute, so I ain't never heard of that before, so this is like breaking news for me. live on Facebook Live, Healing Historical Trauma web series. You heard it here, Kings and Queens Academy. Where that's gonna be at? That's gonna where you trying to launch that at?
Trying to launch it in the Bay.
In the Bay. Shout out to the Bay. San Francisco or Oakland?
To be determined.
Hunts Point, right? Hunters Point or Hunts Point? Hunters Point,
Bayview, Bilmo. It's going down. Lakeview is my hood. It's going down. But we're not sure, but we know it's going to be up here in the Bay. It's going to be a comprehensive school where we are educating our kids on truth, on history, knowledge of self. We're going to have healing. We're going to be engaging with parents, with community. Oh yeah, we plotting and planning and cooking.
So while you shouting out, let's throw a couple of more alley-oops to you. You said something about you wrote a piece. Do you got pieces that's public? Do you want to throw an alley-oop to any of your writings? Do you got topics you just want to share about what you write about? What you mean you wrote?
What you mean you wrote?
I wrote something about voting. What you mean you wrote something about voting?
I write. If you've ever heard me talk before, you know that I'll say in a heartbeat, I write because it's cheaper than therapy. And so it's a way of getting energy out my body. There are all these thoughts that go through my head. There's all this information. I have all this experience. And so 2 of my most recent pieces, as Corey made reference to, I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago entitled The Daily War. I usually post my writings on Medium, which is a website, and I'll post them on my social media. I'm actually working on 2 books. One is going to be my proximity to the punishment system, and then the other one is just about my journey. And so I do a lot of writing, and I have finally embraced the title of a writer, even though a writer. You was trying to fall away from that title for a minute. What's wrong with writer? Break that down. Or what was your journey towards becoming a writer? What was in the middle of some of that? I've always written. I've always written about what I was feeling, whether it's journaling or writing blog. I have a blog, myhealingjourney.me. I find writing to be very cathartic, but I also, when I think of writers, I think of Bell Hooks, and I think of Terry McMillan, and I think of Soldier, and there are just so many great writers. Maya Angelou.
Shout out.
right? Nikki Giovanni. I mean, just we can go on and on and on. And so I don't put titles on myself. I don't take that lightly, because reading has done so much for me. And I have finally embraced the title of writer, really more based on the feedback I've gotten from other people who have read my work, that have been moved and encouraged and have learned things. And so for me, being a writer is about how my writing helps other people. That's why it took me a while to embrace the title of writer for myself. Because, I can think I'm the bomb.com, and then you'll read it and be like, yeah, that one.
I read she got a piece out there about the war, the Daily War. I don't know if that's on one of those mediums she just named, but I was like, oh, I like in that piece there, I like the analysis, and then at some point it became like this kind of compare and contrast, like black people killing black people versus white people, but it's not really compare and contrast. It's kind of saying like this ain't even really the same thing. But like, let me just give. So that was I just like the artistic flow of that too. So that was a dope piece. People, please go check out our sister's work. I don't know, we got a chat going on at Facebook. Somebody listening, do you want to say it one more time, all of the links again? Listen to this, write this down. Where they at?
Write this down. MyHealingJourney.me is my blog, and the Daily War is on there, and it's also on Medium.com. Several of my writings are on both of those. A lot of my writings are on my blog, obviously, but several of my writings are also on Medium.com. A lot of my experiences, what I find, Corey, is, again, working in jails and prisons gives you a whole different perspective of the punishment system. And I say it all the time. It's one thing to go into a jail or a prison to do a program or to speak. It's something totally different when your office is in the jail, where every single day at 6 o'clock in the morning, I report to a jail. And all the toll that takes on me mentally and emotionally, because those are my people in there. And also, let's be real, working for the oppressor. I work for the sheriff's department. And so being who I am and how I show up, that's an internal struggle, because I literally work for the oppressor.
Yeah. Before we go back there, we coming back there, let's get another shout out. I was just talking to our elder, Cheryl Wilkins, AKA Missy. And a big event is going on. I was just in New Orleans. And you was giving a shout out to the Legacy Tour, talking about Plessy versus Ferguson. Me and Mother Green, we was there yesterday, right? Mm-hmm. She's shaking her head like, yeah. We was there yesterday. But I got a call from Missy, AKA Cheryl, and we gonna be out there on June 24th to June 26th. Can you let the people know what's going down, what's going on out there?
Oh, it is going down in New Orleans next week, June 24th through 26th. And it's so funny because as we were on last night building, and you were telling me that you had talked to Cheryl, Cheryl was texting me, telling me she had literally at the same time saying that she had talked to you. So shout out to Cheryl, Center for Justice, my sister Greer, Letitia, all those that are working so hard. Fox and Rob Rich, shout out, that are working so hard to pull this weekend together. So the Center for Justice has a Women's Collective Leadership Institute. And so far, there have been 3 cohorts that have graduated. There is currently a fourth cohort that is meeting. As a matter of fact, they're literally meeting right now. Shout out to them. And I was part of the second cohort. And it's a group of women from all over the country that are just doing amazing, incredible, innovative work in the trenches, trying to get us healed and trying to get us free. There are people doing policy work. There's just amazing work that's going on. So our cohort started at the Beyond the Bars conference in 2020. Then the pandemic happened. We had the whole cohort we did it all virtually. Cohort 3 did theirs virtually. And so we're all coming together in New Orleans on the 24th is our official graduation, which is going to be followed by a second line. I'm so excited. My middle daughter, Cece, lives in New Orleans. So I'm always excited when my kids get to actually be a part of the work that I'm doing. And, you know, Cece swears Corey is her best friend. That is her cousin, Corey. You can't even tell her nothing different.
Cece got to build, man, because that is we best friends, but we just gotta build more. Cece was good. I can't wait to build more and have a chance to slow down and kick it.
Right. So our graduation in the second line is Friday night.
The second line? The second line?
You heard?
I was in Congo Square yesterday, man. What the second line mean? I don't think people. I didn't know what the second line meant a little bit till I went yesterday. So, what is the second line?
So if you've seen movies that are based in New Orleans, okay, I'm not an expert on the second line, so let me say that right now. I'm going to share what I know about second lines. I know that I've often seen them after homegoing services or funerals. That's a tradition in New Orleans. So that's where I initially saw them. I didn't realize that they have second lines frequently. And last year, earlier this year, I was in New Orleans with my daughter, visiting her, and she took me to a second line. It was my first time going to a second line, and baby, we outside for the second line.
What are you doing? What goes on? What is the second line?
There's going to be a band that plays music like jazz, New Orleans type music. There are going to be steppers that are like they're doing these dances and step-ins. They usually have umbrellas. There are the second line I went to had different organizations and groups. They were all had their part in the parade. I don't know if it's okay to call it a parade, but you're marching through the streets and people are on both sides. And it's just, whenever I see us all together, I'm so excited. And it's a deep tradition of New Orleans. And so we're having a second line following our graduation on Friday night.
Let me just add to that. So once again, I ain't no expert in second line either, but we was on a legacy tour yesterday. We was in New Orleans. We definitely went to Louis Armstrong Park at Congo Square, and we read all of the documents. Oh. So whatever the documents say, but part of what we learned is that in Congo Square, that the indigenous people, you know, they say indigenous, I'm going to say this, Corey's going on the record, the Black indigenous people, because everybody know in Louisiana, they don't have front in Louisiana. We know that the Black people there were native there way before Columbus and the rest of them. But they used to be there, and peep this, folks, because they say that Black people are not indigenous, that we, you know, like we built the mounds in Mississippi all the way up there. We also had communities where we was building homes with logs, with trees. And we was hitting that corn, squash, and beans. You know, we had them three sisters. But part of what they was doing there before colonization was they was celebrating the corn harvest. And then what they say Congo Square turned into, after the indigenous people got colonized, then them, and they say African enslaved people started doing gatherings there on Sunday. But it's the same people, you know. They just it's the same people. That's why they went back to the same gatherings. And then out of that tradition, second line came out of that tradition. Jazz came out of that tradition. So second line, I don't know what it is all the way, but it was saying that it comes out of the harvest, the Sunday gatherings while people was in chattel slavery, and then it's sprinkled into jazz and second line. Real quick.
What we're going to do as a culture, we going to get together. We're going to break bread. and we're gonna turn up, whatever that turn up looks like in your family, in your community. But we are communal people.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back into the war. So is there anything you want to add about that definition of the war we gave? Anything you want to push back on? Like what's, you know, you want to give some of your spirit to the war as we move into healing historical trauma element of the war?
Absolutely. There's so many different things that we could talk about as it relates to the war, but one of the things that I want to mention, you know, as we talk about the war, as we talk about historical trauma, and we talk about journeying, is as a people, we have to be all gas, no brakes. You know, I feel like we start thinking that we've made accomplishments, and then we let off on pushing lines. When we look at the 60s are a good example, where, you know, they're going hard, they're protesting and saying, we need this, we need that, we need access to this, that, and the third. And then there are some things that have changed, and then we kind of let up, if that makes sense. And so I think one of the things that we need to acknowledge and be honest about is there is no American dream, not for us. When you talked earlier about false textbooks, and I was thinking, oh yeah, it's false textbooks. It was also some false hope and some false promises and some false dreams. It's not for us. America is not welcoming us. And because we got the right to vote, and because we got access to certain jobs that were considered to be good jobs and stable jobs, and because we were able to begin owning property and going to certain schools, no, we ain't arrived. Like we not winning. We're still at war. And and for me, we have to keep that at the forefront. One of the things, you know, you were saying, you mentioned, how do we get knowledge? That's such a good question, because how do we know what we don't know? If we think that by sending our kids to school, they're going to get information that they need to be quote unquote successful, no, that's not what the schools do. The schools teach our kids lies. The schools oppress us. The schools are oftentimes our kids' first introduction experience with systems that aren't for us. The war looks like in 2022, the war is, we suspended kindergartners? Like, what, he didn't color in the lines right? Like, what are we doing? Literally, kindergartners are being suspended. First graders are being expelled. It's our kids that's happening to. We are in war. The public schools aren't for us. You know, the whole push for college, let's be clear on what we push in college for. You know, again, the war is everywhere, and it's based on a country that was built on not seeing us as people, enslaving us, violence, thievery, murder, rape, pilgrimage. This is what this country was built on. So what makes us think that at any point a country in its founding documents does not consider us people? Why would we think that we would ever be anything more than what we were when we were brought here? And I'm saying that from the space of America's view of us. America been killing us in the streets. And what I said in my piece on the war is, we can say, oh, they killing our elders now, but they've been killing our elders. They have been killing us, from babies to elders and everything in between, the whole time before we even got here. What you thinking?
I'm listening to the rain come down in Mississippi, man, and thunder. I don't know if y'all hear the thunder in the background. And I'm thinking about going into the medicine. So just going into the healing from historical trauma. And I think, you know, we got the war there and we want to focus on healing from historical trauma, but give us some, you know, the epistemological question is like, how do we recollect like memory knowledge by leaning into historical wounds for medicine, right? So what is historical wounds? What is historical pain, historical trauma? But really, like, what is it like in your medicine, like you, your life, your family, like in your experience, how was that war in your block, in your communities, and in your 360, so that we can understand what it is as a definition, but understand what it is also as it's moving through our families and, like, you know, as it's moving through our thing. And then we want to talk about, like, what are some things that make, you know, what are some ways that we could dream past that? But let's start cooking right there.
Okay. So one of the ways that I am clear how the war has moved through my family, and again, this all came with me journeying this year, the insight and the revelations that I've gotten is so often Black people want to assimilate. And I knew from an early age when I first was taught knowledge of self and knowledge of our history, truth, in a summer program, it changed me. It changed the way I viewed myself. It changed the way I viewed this country. It changed the way I thought. And that change, my family wasn't ready for. And what I've learned is that they understood on some level that being quote unquote radical, there's a cost to it. And so I have been, the conflict, the war was within my family because I was 13, 14, 15 years old, being blackity black, reading Malcolm and Angela and about George and Jonathan and the Panthers and the Black Liberation Army and so forth and so on in a family that wasn't about that. And now I see that that caused conflict within the family, and that had me looking at myself as if it was something wrong with me. But that's what the war will do to you. The war in this country will have you thinking that you should be this kind of way in order to be accepted, but we never gonna be accepted. So whether you are aspiring to assimilate, if you are being the white man, or if you are Black power, this country hates us all the same. So that's how I've seen it. I've seen it, you know, in my neighborhood, in my community. With gentrification, there's less than 3% Black people in San Francisco. But as somebody who worked in the jails, are we there? How are we 60% of the jail population? We only 3%.
Are we there?
Right. You know, that's the war. Are we the only ones? Are we the only ones breaking the law? No. You know, but that's the war. The war tells our young people that they have to go to a school because they've been expelled from public school. So now they have one school in the community where all the kids who've been expelled from public school have to go. But if you know anything about hoods, you know all those kids can't be at one school. So when they don't go to school, the system says that they're refusing to go to school and they're this and they're that. But the war doesn't care that all these kids from all these different neighborhoods are supposed to go to this one school. It's everywhere, and it takes on so many different forms. How has the war impacted my family? I have a son who survived 17 gunshot wounds and one that died at 19. The war has us killing each other. I see it everywhere. You know, I see it everywhere. The historical trauma, is in our DNA. What was my grandfather's, what was going on? You talked about on the inside. What was going on in the inside when he had to leave? What was going on in the inside when he gets to Texas and he doesn't know anybody? He just knows that his parents said, you need to go to this house. What's going on the inside when my grandfather is in the Navy, when the military doesn't want us? What's going on in the inside when his two sons went to the Navy too, went to the military too? Historical trauma, it's just continuous and it's generational. And sometimes we don't even recognize that that's what it is. Historical trauma had me parenting from a place of fear. Historical trauma had my parents parenting from a place of fear, and my grandparents. Not awareness. Now I parent from a place of awareness, not fear.
So that was beautiful, man. I want you just to circle back on some of that. When you say like your family was impacted by assimilation, or just like not being ready for somebody that's radical, like what are you seeing, or what do you remember or understand from that experiences, or just, you know, like what is the pain in that? What is the hurt there?
Ooh.
Like what is I don't know what assimilate and what radical is by just reading that book, but like what do you think is the blockage, the historical blockage that make some family members, some community members be like, yo, you reading that, like you too radical? Like what is the blockage? What is the hurt in that place there? What's there?
I think the hurt was,
and not in you, I'm talking about like 5 families.
Right.
So you can speak about you too. How did that hurt you? But also I want to know what's the hurt in our family that feel like I can say you radical because you reading that, but I'm blocked. Like I don't move that. I don't read that. Like, so I'm saying, what's their blockage? I heard you say like they assimilate. So let's use that word. Why they assimilate? Like how historical trauma got them assimilating, got them in a blockage where if you read that, you consider radical. Then also, how does that historical trauma show up in the fact that like you might feel like, damn, my family think I'm radical or don't mess with me in a certain way? I don't know. Like, how does that make you feel if you radical? Like when your family tell you radical in that moment there, 13, 14, 15 years old, or for another young person, 13, 14, 15 years old?
So in the Bay, I mean, all over the country, but in the Bay Area, when in the 60s, it was popping out here with the Panthers and the 70s, and you know they wasn't playing no games, and it was spunky in terms of the violence being perpetrated on Black people everywhere. So my grandparents and my parents had experienced the inability to have access to school, to jobs. My grandfather only had a 5th grade education. And so my parents were the first generation who had access to jobs that provided a level of stability that was new. And so assimilation for me is, you know, getting those jobs and working on those jobs despite the consequences of being on those jobs. What was it like for my dad to be a police officer in the mid-60s when it was such a tumultuous time in this country for Black people, and the white boys didn't want him on the force and the Black people were calling him sellout? Those are some of the things that the harm, right? But nobody talked about it. My dad and his partner were ambushed. His partner was killed, and nobody talked about it. So the manifestation of the historical trauma and the harm is not talking about things. And we saw, I mean, that's pretty often is prevalent in our families where as kids, you know stuff is going on, but nobody's talking to you. And don't dare ask, because then you better stay out of grown folks' business, right? So those are some of the ways that I saw we didn't grow. We just became stagnant, you know, and I wanted to study. I wanted to read. I was 15 when I wanted to change my name. And they like, yo, you tripping. You just going through a phase, you know? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Good.
But the secrecy, you know, the secrets, the family secrets is all a result of historical trauma. If we don't talk about things, it's like being in denial in a lot of ways. But we weren't, everything that I learned because I studied and then passed on to my children. And again, it's no diss to my family. This is just my journey and my truth.
But just to that point, I was just thinking, like, when you said your family was the first to get jobs and all of that, I get what you're saying, but just want to hear your feedback, because as I thought about it, I'm like, just because you got jobs, that don't mean you can't read Black Panther. You should be able to still get your job. Like, what's theirs? Like, so they got jobs, and our families move up and we move into certain kind of situations. Was there an unwritten law, like if you're reading these things, you lose your job? Like if you're doing these things, you probably going to be seen as somebody who trust that work? Like, how does being the first people to have an opportunity to get jobs as Black people relate to, like, you can't read certain things about social justice? That's kind of like what I get it, but I also don't get it, if that makes sense.
Again, they weren't telling me I couldn't read the books, but nobody else was reading them. And so who am I discussing them with? You know, I think that I think that that's even true now. I'm sorry? I think that it's even true now that people still have a thought that if they're too Black, it's going to be problematic on their jobs. Or
that's what I was getting to. That's what I was trying to say. Like, it ain't. That's probably what I was really thinking. Like that's a truth, an unwritten or written truth. Like, that's what I heard you said. Like, yo, they the first people coming out of that migration that was able to get stuff. So but you didn't say it, but you said it now. There's an unwritten law. If you be too Black, you won't get that job. You know what I'm saying? You won't be able to keep that job. You putting that job at risk. You putting your new opportunities in shaky grounding.
Right. And so for me coming up, you know, being conditioned to believe that I need to look a certain way when I go for a job interview. I remember for years I would take my nose ring out because, again, nobody had their nose pierced when I got my nose pierced. Not wearing braids to job interviews, like all these things that I was taught that I needed to do in order to get a job. Is it accurate? Is it true? I don't know, because when I was younger, I always did the thing that my mom said I needed to do in order to go to present myself, you know? And go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish that.
That was what I'm saying. You know, even now, people operate in that space.
We got 9 minutes, so we're gonna try to do a little rapid to get some wisdom in. So you said something about parenting out of fear. Talk more about parenting out of fear, how historical trauma is played into that.
The way historical trauma played into that was so much that was happening during slavery and in subsequent years was done in secret. And so there's a culture of secrecy within the Black family that doesn't have the correct boundaries, in my opinion. So things that we should talk about, we don't talk about. So as a teenager, when you are being told not to have sex, it's because either the Bible or don't bring no babies in here, right? But no conversations about the emotional part of it or the physical part of it or those kind of honest conversations about, you know, not having sex or dating or whatever. It was just don't do it. And that's part of the historical trauma and the fear of just don't do it. But let's have dialogue so I can understand what it's based in. Why don't you want me to do it? Why don't you want me to go to Oakland when I was growing up? And again, because Oakland was Oakland, you know? And so those are kind of the ways that we see the secrecy. Can we just have conversations, open and honest conversations? It's not about being right or wrong or blame or fault. It's about dialogue. It's about gaining understanding. It's about growing and building and healing.
Keeping it going. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So keeping it going, circling back on, you said that you experienced historical trauma, like by having a son being shot 17 times and also losing a son to gun violence. And a lot of people in the world are focused on gun violence, but I don't very rarely hear people tie it to historical trauma. So just how you see historical trauma connected to that experience that you have and so many other people have?
In 6 minutes? Okay, 6 minutes. 2 minutes. Now you first did a lot in 6 minutes, so I think I could do it too. During slavery, and we were pitted against each other. And so that internal, you talked about that, internalized violence. I hate somebody who looks like me because historically, if I was light, I was treated this way. If I was dark, I was treated that way, and so forth and so on. And so how is it that I can harm somebody who looks like me when we're both oppressed, but we don't understand that? And so that's what happens, is that we harm each other, you know? And we started building on this last night, but we don't have time to get into it today. But rather than us being focused on being Black first, not from where you're from and we don't get along, not that, we Black. And so I can't harm somebody who looks like me. And because I understand historical trauma, I'm not even hating or mad at the people who harm my boys because I know that they were harmed. That's what I got. That was...
No, that was good. I'm just thinking about what you're saying too, because
we've been in competition with each other for hundreds of years. I want to see my people win. And when I see sisters winning, that just inspires me and encourages me while I'm congratulating them that I could win too. We're not in competition with each other. We should be lifting each other up, being each other's biggest cheerleader. But the historical trauma, the history that pitted us against each other, we are still operating in that, and we don't even know why. How could I harm somebody who looks like me only based on where he geographically lives? Think about that. So the continuous of the historical trauma of, you know, and then the internalized violence, we can talk about, you know, how do we feel about how we look and everything that goes along with that. And again, I'm not knocking anybody who is however they look. I'm saying, am I straightening my hair because it's easier to deal with, or am I straightening my hair but based on some American standard of beauty? No, this is the standard of beauty. And we are a beautiful people, you know? But again, historical trauma tells me that the standard of beauty does not look like me.
We got 3 minutes. That was good. One of your things you said that we probably won't be able to go into is like it's in our DNA. But I just ride that and then pass you the last question. But to your point there, I agree with you that like us being put against each other has been in our DNA for so long. And I think, you know, we could at least go back to the colonization of Africa and how the French, the British would land on different ports and get cool with different African tribes, give them guns, liquor, and certain things for black people, for slaves. You could think about the same thing here in America when the French, the German, the Spain, the Portugal, they landed over here. They got cool with certain tribes. And once again, the black Native Americans were selling each other to them, and then they sacked us all. And when we think about our block versus block, street gang versus street gang, and definitely how our street gang started off as a community organizing strategy to take care of our blocks, and then the COINTELPRO and the government, you know, they come in and they intentionally create chaos amongst us. But then, like you said, there's also a historical reality of this psychosis being in our DNA for a lot of generations, going back to the continent of Africa. In 1 minute, what can you give us a story in your life, in your experience, your daughters, your sons, your work, that, you know, brings hope to like this conversation about healing from historical trauma?
In 1 minute, I don't know. I think that to put it in 1 minute is to say that despite what we've been through as a family, and we've been through tremendous trauma and tragedy and loss, that we still are living our lives in service to other people. We still love Black people. We still are about community. And we have redefined what success is. We have redefined what winning is. We have redefined even what fun is, you know. We spend so much time together, and we are turning up. And when I say turning up, I'm not talking about we getting high and we drinking and nothing like that. I'm saying, although, you know, we may. I'm saying that we have so much fun because we understand the importance of family. We understand the importance of community, you know. And the last thing I'll say is that my son, I'm gonna leave with the words that my son said a couple of weeks ago. The one who survived 17 gunshot wounds. He said the best way to heal from trauma is to surround yourself with love. And that's what I have intentionally done. My love for y'all, you already know. What they say was understood, don't have to be said. Like, y'all are my family. And yeah, so the best way to heal from trauma is to surround yourself with love.
We started with talking about that cultural wellness, man, that Blackness, no matter what's going on, you always got your cultural wellspring, and love is definitely part of Black Indigenous cultural wellspring. I wish we had more time. Thanks for everybody for checking in. Give a shout out to our big sister, AYOOLA, from the west side of Turtle Island. Shout out to San Francisco. Shout out to your family. Tell Cece we got to get up when we get up. Hopefully in New Orleans and in the 26th to the 24th to the 26th. We got another live coming up June 30th. June 30th, 6 p.m. to 7:30 with Dr. Anna Ortega Williams. We're going to keep it moving with healing from historical trauma. Once again, shout out to Alex, A-Rocks, and the whole Holland YOC team and our ancestors and our legacy. Shout out to Isaac for holding down in the background. We closing out with our elders that are still with us. Free us, our political prisoners. Free our people that's exiled. We standing on our ancestors and the development of civilization that comes from our love, our cultural wellspring. And in closing, as we open, we close with spirit. So we mourn for all the thorns and the torns in relationships. I said we mourn from all the thorns and the torns in relationships. It's not just our moms. We talking about all forms of relationships. Frustration sits, our patience slips. We anger quick when pain is thick. It's like trauma got a home in our relationships. Up late night, all alone trying to face this shit. Hurt so real, ain't no way I could fake this shit. The shit I said to you, ain't no way you could take that shit. I think it's time for us to start owning our relationships. I think it's time for us to start growing our relationships. Shout out to H.O.L.L.A. We out of here. Peace. Thank you.
Peace.
Okay. YOC. Thank y'all all for tuning in.
Free them all.
Free them all. Black power. Free our political prisoners. Shout out to Elder Surya Akode, who just got home. Shout out to our Elder Baba Sekou. Rest in peace, Kathy Boudin. We got to talk to the family. We got to talk to the Center for Justice. But we've been working on the museum from all of the findings from our legacy tours. And our first museum exhibit is going to be the non-traditional approach to youth and community development across 50 to 60 years of generations. And we're thinking about having a statue. We're giving y'all early details. So, you know, a statue of Eddie Ellis and a statue of Kathy Boudin for our first exhibit, the non-traditional approach. Our research institute is coming soon.
If you want to live your best life, watch the documentary, We Came to Heal. Download the album, The Report Back. Shout out to H.O.L.L.A. They are healing all over this country. 7 neighborhoods in New York. Thank you so much for joining us. Peace.
Yo, grab a
space. We
Let's
make
circle
space
up.
so you could take space.
Everybody bring their best self.
It's a safe space.
Anybody
we
can
make
pop it
space
off.
so you could take space.
She a story, I'll hold the space for you. She a story, I'm listening, I'll take it and I'll take it and I'm listening, I'll hold the space for you.
It's a safe
She a
space.
story,
We make space so you could take space.
She a story, I'll hold the space for you. She a story, I'm listening, I'll take it and I'll take it and I'm listening, I'll hold the space for you.
It's a
She
safe space.
story,
We make space so you could take space.
Young wild child, looking like a nigga with my knees scraped. Be great, what my mama said when I had lost faith. Ultra lonely with a big mouth, and my biggest sister's baby bro, he had a temper. Wish that all our lives were simpler. Don't trip by Phoenix like my niece name. Never let the deep pain consume me in the room of doom. I peep game. Now I'm in full bloom, new moons and I see the stars. Never thought I'd make it far, living my whole life with scars.
Dark skin, melanin, beauty in the sun ray. Shadow of oppression, segregation, modern slavery. Darkness is a gift and a curse, you can't save me. Believe from the birth of my skin, since pre-K. All I wanted was a friend, maybe a playmate. But they say your skin is too dark, your hair ain't straight. Tragic to a kid in the city trying to be great. Teachers teach you like a dog, it is wrong, there's no escape. Standing in my truth, grounded in the sense of truth. Empower girls far and wide, melanin is your prize. Only way to begin, magnify your melanin. Kings and queens, be great, let's elevate and share your story.
I'll hold the space for you. She a story, I'm listening, I'll take it and I'll take it and I'm listening, I'll hold the space for you.
It's a safe
She a
space.
story,
We make space so you could take space.
She a story, I'll hold the space for you. She a story, I'm listening. listening, I'll take it and I'll take it and I'm listening, I'll hold the space.
It's a safe space. We make space so you can take space.
Before you share your story, let me tell you who I am. Yo, my name is Corey, and speaking truth ain't always easy, but you gotta own it. And unaddressed pain, we can't condone it, cause we done healed from painful moments. That trauma, we pick a bone with. Too much for us to sit alone with. And I ain't perfect, but certain. That what we doing is working. I'm just asking, how you healing if others is hurting? Share your story.
No pain, no glory. Let me share my story. I got a cougar called Nina, that's my favorite 40. In the streets it's kill or die, so I keep it on me. And I pray, cause some nights I feel the reaper on me. But we straight. They might catch me slipping, but I keep faith. That's why I'm in and out like a cheap date. You see me eat the team 8.
I got your back, I hold you down. I got your back, I hold you down. I got your back, I hold you down. I got your back, I hold you down, down, down.
It's a safe space.
I got your back,
we
I
make
hold
space
you
so you
down.
can take space.
I got your back, I hold you down.
It's a safe
I got
space.
your back,
We
I
make
hold
space
you
so you
down.
can take space.
I got your back, I hold you down, down.